As above, so below.
Welcome to Connecting with Coincidence. I am your host, Dr. Bernard Beitman, MD. I'm a psychiatrist. I study meaningful coincidences. I think a lot of you know that by now. And I try to figure out categories and explanations, and it's just a lot of fun. Right now, I'm working on fleshing out the anatomy of meaningful coincidences, meaning all the variables that go into creating a meaningful coincidence, just what it is. But that's for another time. Today, I'm going to start off with a story, and we're going to have a little bit of a different play. Our guest today is John Townley, who's a musician and a resonance kind of guy. I mean, resonance kind of guy, and astrological and a lot of other things that I'll tell you about. But what he's going to do first is that he's going to comment on the story that I tell. As I usually do at the beginning of these things, I tell a story. And remember, if you want to tell your story to other people, come to the Coincidence Cafe, which you can sign up for at thecoincidenceproject.net, the Coincidence Project, all one word, .net, and go to the page that says participate and come to the Coincidence Cafe and start telling your stories and start hearing other people's stories. And you'll be surprised how common they are among this subset of people. But some of you may be telling people stories and they'll say, we're going to try to change that and make coincidences recognized as a normal part of regular reality and be able to get people to talk about them as we are encouraging you to do, and as I will do with John Townley today. So the story might be titled A Favor Returned. So a guy named Phoenix owed me a favor. And I needed a bloodstone because someone told me I needed a bloodstone. I was perhaps a spirit guide, said, get a bloodstone. And I didn't know what that was. And several people in several stores did not know what I was talking about. So I just kind of let it go. So one Saturday, I was doing an exercise of just writing down the weird things that I saw in my environment. The marketplace was a way of talking about it, but people, when I'm around other people. And I walked the 3 miles downtown to the downtown mall, writing these coincidences or odd events down. I'm doing it for 49 days. I'm right in the middle of it. A block from the mall, as I decided to go right instead of left, for example, as I'm waiting for the light to change, I look over to see Phoenix also about to cross. So he's standing, we're about to cross the street. That's a coincidence when you get two parts of the thing, two events that cross over, and we had no arrangement to meet each other. And there's no explanation for how we got together, at least conventional explanation. So he's waiting for the light and I'm waiting for the light. And he says, oh, Dr. Coincidence. He suggests we go to a bar on the mall. And I said, no, I don't think so. He says, how about going to a rock shop? I said, a rock shop. Well, we went to the rock shop, had a good time. And of course they had a bloodstone. So Phoenix, who owed me a favor, returned the favor in this coincidental way. So I'm asking John now, John Townley, our guest, before I fully introduce him, to tell us his opinion of this story.
I would say that between both of you, the bloodstone was in the air, as it were. That's something that you're both sharing and you're both looking to happen. And when you two happen, what's the next thing that's going to be on your mind? There's this floating bloodstone thing that we haven't dealt with, and hey, there's a rock shop around. Why don't we look for a bloodstone? I have a blood-curdling story of seriality about a bloodstone, and I'll tell you sometime about bloodstone on a ring that was literally cursed, and I have no idea, but it goes on forever. Bloodstones have a reputation of considerable intensity and even violence, and I can tell you the one I ran into did. But what I think was happening was a lot of, and there are always phrases for what for different forms of seriality or synchronicity that are already in the language. Like I said, something's in the air. Well, something's in the air, then it just pops up, you know.
Well, what if I were to tell you that there's nothing that he was thinking about as a bloodstone? Phoenix had nothing of that in his mind. It was just mine.
It was just yours.
Yeah, he had no. The favor he owed me was for something I did for him entirely different.
But he hadn't heard any bloodstone references at all.
No.
At all.
That I know about. And
okay, good.
And when
Gotcha.
we went to the rock store, he was not looking for a bloodstone. I told him I was looking for a bloodstone.
Oh, well, if you told him he was looking for that, then you go to the rock shop and there it is.
Well, I told him when we got to the rock store
that
I was looking for a bloodstone. Right. So he didn't know anything about the bloodstone until we got to the rock store.
So it was in your air.
In my air, not his.
Yeah, and he wandered into it, and there he was.
And there he was. Well, there's more to it probably from your perspective, but we'll leave that alone for now.
Yeah.
What this illustrates is that the stories need to be told clearly enough for the listener to understand the story. John made an assumption that Phoenix also was thinking about a bloodstone. He was not.
Right.
And what I was thinking about with Phoenix, but not at that time, was that he owed me a favor because I did him one.
Right.
And it was a big favor. So he and a friend of his and I both agreed there should have been some reciprocity. And in this way, it was. But he didn't do any of this on purpose. There was nothing in his mind about returning the favor or anything about a bloodstone.
Right.
But he says, let's go to a rock store that I didn't know existed, and I've been to the mall a bunch of times. So that's how this can get complicated. But let me introduce John Townley more formally. He's a writer and a folk pop musician and a record producer, a maritime preservationist, a theoretical astrologer with a broad list of published books and record albums. And that's important in all this because we're going to be talking about resonance and how music is so important a representation of how reality works. There's a lot of resonance that's going on in and around us that synchronicity and seriality, which you're going to hear more about, because John is probably, from what I know, the world's expert in seriality, which is, if you read my book, Meaningful Coincidences, you will see that I use the term meaningful coincidences to include 4 different kinds of coincidences: synchronicity, serendipity, and seriality, which is lesser known, and simulpathity, which means being able to feel or feeling the pain of a loved one, usually at a distance. So seriality is a key part of the whole meaningful coincidence idea. And our guest today, John Townley, is the full representative of that idea. And he gets it from Paul Kammerer and his seminal 1919 book, Das Gesetz der Series, the law of seriality, which introduced the structural concept of seriality. And it was tapped by Jung in his speculation on synchronicity. And Jung does mention Kammerer, who came before Jung in writing about synchronicity in his way. And Paul Kammerer, is important to know, was using the science of his time, which still may apply to now, to try to explain seriality rather than going to more broadly mystical ways of trying to explain. He was a biologist, Paul Kammerer, and a very interesting guy. And we'll hear more about him. But Paul would sit in a park in Vienna and write down things that he would see in common, like people with the same color umbrella or same kinds of shoes, or he would see people with the same number on a ticket or connect them. And there's lots of stories in a translation of this book that are pretty basic things that are just objective, which don't have necessarily meaning to them. And we'll talk about seriality and meaning with our guest today, John Townley. Well, John, welcome to Connecting with Coincidences. Glad to be back talking with you.
Delightful.
Well, we're going to start with getting people to know you by having you tell a coincidence story yourself.
Well, you run into a lot of them, and you run into a lot of them of all the different kinds that you describe, and some of them are more amazing than others, and some are only maybe seriality and maybe just a phenomenon that is not that well known. The sympathetic one that you mentioned, for instance, that you had an experience of choking when your father died, when he was choking, and he was far away, and it was at exactly the same time that happened. And that sounds like a serial mystery. I had a similar thing happen with my father when I was in New York, just making my living as a musician at the time. And I had a dream at 6 o'clock in the morning, a very intense dream that I was back in my house in my bathroom in Coconut Grove, Florida. And that I suddenly was urinating blood, and it upset me like crazy. But then I woke up and I realized, no, you're on 10th Street in Manhattan, and you're not there at all. So it's okay. But I called my mom that night and asked how things were, and she said, well, not that great. Your father woke up at 6 this morning and went to the bathroom and urinated blood at exactly the same time, because she took down the time as well. And that sounds like a matter of coincidence, some would say, or seriality. But as we discover more and more incidences of this, we discover that animals, particularly in close family units, but certainly in species, but particularly close family units where they have a regular communication with each other, will do exactly that. They have communications at long distance in emergencies, in a manner that we don't know how it's communicated yet, but it happens often enough to be a phenomenon, not an accident. It appears to be an accident to us when it happens to us by ourselves, and that's so much of seriality is because we see something odd happening to us, and it's particularly has some strong meaning to us, and we think that's the only time it's ever happened, and we therefore say, well, is this a message from God? Is this a terrible something?
Well, John, that's why I've done the research on this one, because I've got data that says, yes, this is not an uncommon experience among human beings. You're adding that it happens with other animals as well. And there's other data that's even better than what I have from here in Virginia from the Division of Perceptual Studies at the University of Virginia. It says the same thing. So this is a common experience, and how you experience it. I experienced it literally what my father was experiencing, and you experienced it in a dream. You didn't pee blood. I was choking.
No.
And the variations on experiencing the pain of another one at a loved one at a distance are many. However, they happen. They happen. A friend of mine woke up with a deep headache. His mother 3 hours away, had just hit her head. This is not uncommon. And as you say, we think it's messages from God or something else. It's a form of telepathy.
Right.
Telepathy used to mean feeling at a distance, tele-distance pathy feeling.
Sure.
And so I made up the term simulpathity. And you and I can get into a discussion of your definition of seriality and mine, and we'll touch on it a little bit. But for Kammerer, it was all objective things that you could see, that two people could see, that a second observer could see the numbers on a ticket or the umbrellas in a park. No one can see you dreaming about your father, about you about you peeing blood. No one can see that. And I call that different. But that's the kind of discussion that our taxonomists can get into. But I'm seriality. Now, I mean, as Kammerer seemed to suggest, that a third person could see it, and he's an objective scientist, so he wanted to be able to have a third person to be observed.
Well, that's a one way of looking at it as data, but many of his things are solo things that he personally experienced himself that no one else did. For instance, he was humming suddenly started humming a piece of I forget, it was Brahms or something like that, and suddenly through the window comes the very same phrase of someone playing that very tune.
Okay, well,
down the street. No one else but him and them had that.
Now I am educated. I see what Kammerer. I didn't see that part because I don't think it was in what I was able to read of Kammerer's description.
No, we translated that.
So you've got the whole thing. So what I mean by seriality is what I just said.
Yes, I understand. Yeah.
And what you mean by seriality is any pairs of anything, or it could be triples. And I like the seriality of like 100 monkeys or 1111 because they're observable by others. But these definitions need to give way to some basic ways of thinking about meaningful coincidences. Right. They are overlapping and they're confusing. Serendipity and synchronicity are also confusing for people. So I understand what you mean, but let's just leave that for future people. I have a different way of thinking about things and saying that they all coincidences are made up of only two things: mind and object. And you put the three together and you get mind and object, you get mind and mind, telepathy, for example, and you get object, which is observable. Each with that series is observable by another person. So that's my way of breaking it down, so we don't get into
got you. And I'm sure there are particularly as we find out more of supposedly mystic phenomena, which aren't so mystic anymore, as we have enough data and we develop tools that will be able to measure them, which we are doing now, is that we'll be able to break them down even more. Kammerer, with the science of his time, projected seriality as something that was basically encompassed them all. Anytime you had an odd set of things occurring together, whether somebody saw it or not, whether somebody experienced it or not, that was a phenomenon of seriality. And the reason he proposes that is that he looks at reality as basically sets of information that have laws that are somewhat similar to the kind of laws that were being drawn up during the 19th century. And in the second part of his book, he discusses at length many other scientists' development of stuff, of Faraday's stuff, of Maxwell's stuff, of Boseman's stuff, as to why all of these things would fit into the idea that reality is made up of really information when it comes to the very background of it all, and that there were certain laws of attraction and imitation that caused information to suddenly double up in odd ways that sometimes you notice, and when you do, you say, "My goodness, how'd that happen?" And when you don't notice, it'll pass you right by, and you didn't even know.
The idea that the universe is information is getting very popular these days,
It is,
as you well know.
yeah,
And it may be different levels of, I'll call it a density of information. That the more dense information becomes something that we are now able to have bodies within.
right.
And the
And
higher, go ahead.
yeah, it's the density and it's the receiver as well, and the receiver and the training of the perception of the receiver as to whether something is the same or startlingly the same or doesn't seem to be related at all.
Well,
The,
that's such an important idea, John, in looking at meaningful coincidences. The perceiver, the subjective experience of similarity between two events, is something that has to be continually examined to measure, and it's possible to measure the analogical similarity of two events. So my father choking, your dream of bleeding are pretty much the same thing, almost the same thing as what each
right.
of our fathers was experiencing. But some people make connections between things that other people wouldn't say are similar.
Yeah, and that has to do with their own background as to what they think is similar to begin with. In other words, the receiver, a radio receives certain frequencies and not others. And in fact, it receives certain frequencies according to whether its wavelengths, whether the information in those wavelengths is modulated, in order to reproduce a sound when it's put through an amplifier. It can be modulated by how loud that frequency is made, or it can be how slow and how fast that frequency is made. And that's the difference between AM and FM radio, amplitude modification and frequency modification. And that's how, and the receiver is a little crystal that tunes into, in other words, when it gets a particular wavelength coming in, it starts to vibrate along that wavelength and only that wavelength. And that's called entrainment, which is something Christian Huygens discovered way back in the 1600s when he discovered the pendulums, clocks synchronizing up. That there are certain things that will vibrate at only certain frequencies. And we, as animals, recognize selectively certain frequencies that we can hear, and we associate with patterns that sometimes are very much the same, and sometimes we wouldn't even recognize that it's the same. A really good example, it does come from music, and it has to do with scale, things that happen on a really big scale. We don't notice so much, and things that happen on a really tiny scale, we can't see them, so we don't notice them that much. We notice things that happen on our own scale. I move my hand back and forth like that, and you notice my hand moving back and forth like that. But if I did it fast enough, all you get is a blur. You don't see a hand anymore, and that's because it's going into another scale, another set, just like we hear tones in certain frequencies, and we don't hear microwaves. We can feel microwaves, though they may be near the same frequencies that we're hearing.
And how does this relate to meaningful coincidences?
It has to do with whether you know things that are happening that are in fact very meaningful. but to go back to the final example, everybody knows, but they don't know that they know it, is in beats per second. Everybody knows if they've taken any music that, like 60 to 72 beats, and that's andante. That's like a strolling, dun, 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 like that, right? And you go faster and faster and faster, and pretty soon you're hurry up and you're rushing along. And after a certain point, you get up to 120, 240 beats per minute, and you're just falling all over yourself. And pretty soon that becomes just a sort of a blur of sort of a scratchy, ratchety kind of sound, until you get up to like 60 beats per second. And that's a low bass tone. And you double that to 120 seconds, to 120, and then 240, and suddenly you're in middle C.
Now this is a music lesson that's maybe it's somewhat beyond me, even though I like dance, and I'm trying to see how it relates to meaningful coincidences.
It relates to meaningful coincidence because you think you're hearing one thing and another thing discreetly when you're actually hearing the same thing at a different scale. So you may be picking up stuff that's from other people, just telepathically, that's not tuned to your frequencies, as the frequencies of your family are. After a certain amount, everybody gets tuned in there, and that's entrainment. You get entrained in whatever.
Let's stop with the entrainment for a second, because it's so important. The recognition that the pendulums of clocks started swinging in the same way, that they started off disjointed, and then they started doing it together.
Right.
That's an important observation. I've seen a video of it recently, of the same thing. How does that entrainment happen with pendulums of a clock?
Through the wood that they're sitting on. It's actually very simple. If they were clocks in a vacuum, it wouldn't happen. And there has to be some kind of mechanism that transfers some kind of waveform to the next clock, and whoever's got the loudest one, the big clocks entrain the small ones. Whoever's got the loudest ones, the other ones eventually wind up getting in. And this is the same principle that causes we call it, but we try to dismiss it as tidal forces when we see it celestially, and that's why the moon sinks. One side of the moon faces us, because we have entrained the moon's rotation to our own rotation. So it always faces us. It didn't always face us. It had its own rotation when it started, and eventually our rotation it was so dominant that it eventually locked it in. Mercury is the same way.
I can see that with the clocks on the wood, and the wood conveys the vibrational power of the biggest clock to the rest of them. It reminds me of Donald Trump in training people who follow him. There's something about that we might get to, but what's the wood analog between the moon and the earth?
It's in the case of the wood, it's physical vibrations through the wood.
Yeah.
Down from one clock to the next clock, and across the board, because they were all sitting on the same. Originally, Huygens' experiment was done, and they were all sitting on the same shelf. But what we're experiencing here with the moon, or with any planetary situation, this is why astrology comes into it, and why astrology may be something that is much more important than we think it is.
Why? What is more? What is more?
Astrology. Because as the moon goes around, what we're experiencing as we get closer and farther away from any planet that's going around us, there's a pulse of gravity. Gravity gets stronger, gravity gets less. Gravity gets closer together, there's stronger pull, farther apart, less pull. That becomes a waveform, back
Yeah.
and forth, back and
Yeah.
forth.
Yeah.
And that's what eventually put all of the planets that we have now into one form of resonance of each other's orbits, because they nudge each other until they get to a comfortable place where everything locks in. And that entrainment is one of the words for it. Tidal forces is another. And it's simple. It's instead of the sound motion through wood or through air, you can get it through air, or through microwaves, as Chris does with crystals. It's through the pulse of gravity, the distance of gravity. As we pass Jupiter, for instance, we pass Jupiter 12 times on Jupiter going real slow, and we're going on like this, right? Well, every time we get close to Jupiter, it pulls us right out, 100,000 kilometers out of our orbit, and we pull back away from that. So there's like a pulse that's going like that every 12 years. And it's from Jupiter and the Earth's alignment. And eventually, in the case of something that's close to Jupiter, like its moons and so on, that pulse becomes so strong that it locks in whatever the heaviest side is of the body to the heavier piece, and they become locked in.
So Earth has been entrained by Jupiter, and so
yeah, and as has everything else. Jupiter is the main entrainer, and everything is a harmonic or close to it, not exact, because we're still settling in after all these billions of years, but close enough so that they don't throw each other out. Their early system, these planets would be so close that there'd be too much gravity and one of them would get kicked right out. And now they've settled in. So like Uranus and Neptune, for instance, they're octaves of each other, one half. They're one orbit
John,
is double the other.
before you get that far out, and Uranus is on a far out place, you mentioned a few things that have to be clarified. First, I asked you about the moon being entrained by the Earth. That's something that that I think our audience can understand. Jupiter and Uranus get a little more complicated, and we gotta keep this so at least I understand it, and hopefully that'll make other people more able to understand it. So have a lot of information, but one of the most amazing things to us Earth observers is that the moon has its same face to us. For some see the man in the moon, some see a rabbit in the moon, but it's the same face. And as the moon goes around, it gives us the same face all the time. And then there's the dark side of the moon. So people have made up a lot of stories about what's going on the other side of the moon and why, how did it happen that way. But this harmonics and entrainment thing is a way to be able to understand how that happens. And so let's not go out to Jupiter yet. Let's stay here with the moon that we can see. And there's something about the Earth entraining the moon, so that the moon maybe at one time was spinning, and
it is spinning. It's just spinning at the same rate we rotate. What we did was lock in its spin to ours. We entrained its spin. In other words, if it were staying still, we'd see one side and then we see the other, right? But it's not. As it goes around, it keeps facing one side to us. So it's spinning and we're spinning. And what's happened is basically the heaviest part of the moon, which has the strong gravitation, it keeps pulling back. Originally, it would go a little bit further, and then it would get tugged back a little bit further, tugged back a little bit, and eventually it just locked in. And that's how it happened. At least that's the standard astronomical description of how.
Well, I mean, just to keep it here on for us Earthlings to understand what's going on with the face of the moon being entrained, it still turns, but it turns with us. It reminds me of being able to find someone to dance with, And so that after, it's kind of hard to dance with somebody right from the beginning, sometimes not. But then if you do it often enough, you start getting entrained with each other. And I don't know who does
Absolutely.
I don't know who
Absolutely.
does.
Good example. Excellent example.
Well, I don't know who does the entraining with the two people, but it's usually, it will be the one who's heaviest somehow, or who has the strongest energy field, I guess, and trains
Yes.
one with the other.
And it's similar. Another example is the dominant among a test that's been done so many times now. Another example of entrainment is women's menstrual cycles. The dominant female in a group, all their everybody else's menstrual cycles will wind up timing to her. And how does that happen? And that happens through the exchange of hormones in the air until they keep nudging each other, and eventually they get in tune with each other. And the one they get in tune with is the one who is the dominant, has the most dominant presence. And now that dominant presence, in some cases, can be gravitational. In some cases, it can be hormonal. In some cases, it could be any number of things. This is what Kammerer was at the heart of what Kammerer was trying to say, is that you have both attraction to things, which is like gravity. You have imitation of things, where things that are attracted start to imitate each other's motions. And then you have something he called persistence, which is just like inertia, is that once they get that way, they tend to stay that way, and it's very hard to get them out of that. And that's one of the basis of how not just, came Einstein and everything branched off. And Kammerer was at that point.
What were the three things you just mentioned?
His three, which he called hypotheses, was the attraction hypothesis, which is things that are similar tend to come together, and the things tend to come together in general. The imitation hypothesis, which is that they tend to start to resemble more. I mean, even down to people resembling their dogs, right?
Yeah.
And they come to look much more like each other. And then as they begin to work as a system, then they achieve, because of this interlock, a persistence that keeps that system itself. And he treats persistence as if it were like a quality or a force unto itself, which keeps, it keeps old corporations going when they shouldn't be. It keeps old people's ways of thinking going when it shouldn't be, because these are systems that have set themselves up, and they got so locked into each other.
That's another inertia, kinetic inertia is the same idea.
Yeah, his is a reworking of gravitational inertia, which at that time, and still today, nobody knows what inertia is.
Well, let's leave that one alone. We're just going to mean that persistence is another good name for it. It just keeps going in the same direction.
Exactly, it's a universalization of it into information, whereas inertia previously was thought as only a physical thing.
That's good.
And Ernst Mach said, and we still have that's as far as we have gotten yet, it is the force, the influence of all of everything in the universe upon any one thing. And that is what inertia is. That was Mach's definition, and it's still a definition physically.
Well, let's just say persistence is we'll just stay with persistence, because and the energy thing, and imitation, and what's the first thing again?
Imitation, attraction.
Now we can attract. Those are, and because I like to dance, really love to dance sometimes. That's an analogy that we'll get to you as a musician. What your guitar does to an audience is entrainment also. And what we're talking about here at dance is that people in a group that I'm part of start off kind of like the pendulums,
Yeah.
doing their own thing. But after a while, there's something that comes together as
Yeah,
they're all
they-
dancing, and
they-
it's hard to measure that. But let's just do the simple version of dancing with someone, and let's apply the ideas, the three principles that you just described. Attraction. I
Mhm.
mean, there's certain literal attraction. People just
Mhm.
like the idea of the other person, the way they look, the way they dance,
Mhm.
so they come together.
Right.
Like at our place, if somebody smiles at me, that means maybe that she's open to dancing with me, which is what
Right.
happened the other day.
Mhm.
So
Right.
there's attraction, and I thought she was attractive again in the standard kind of way. So
Right.
there's that kind of attraction, but there's also
Mhm.
other forms of attraction between people. And I
Mhm.
wonder if you might comment on what else there is.
Well, there's all kinds of attraction between people for evolutionary reasons and for political reasons, and it's a host of them. But I think they all go by the same set of principles. Attraction means there's something in that other person that's going to, other person or other body or other system of politics or whatever systems you're using. We're all systems. We're all a bunch of different things correlated, which any animal is, any corporation is, any country is. There and you see a certain amount of attraction, and then when you get them together, then they have to begin to imitate each other a bit in order to keep going, so that they, you smooth out the edges, as it were. And what happens then is actually a form of what we call entrainment, or mode locking is another term for it. If you look one, Google
Well,
that.
let's just stay with the simple words like
Yeah,
imitation.
yeah, imitation. So you're
Imitation,
imitating.
because I mean, you're a smart guy. You got a lot of words for stuff, and let's just use the simple words
Go.
of attraction and
Mhm.
imitation, so
Right,
that you're attracted and you start imitating each
right,
other.
right.
And
Following which is persistence. You keep going, and it tends to keep itself going, and you don't want to stop dancing. Yeah, the more you do it, the better it gets, and the longer it lasts until you fall down on your face.
it's funny to watch people dancing. There's some people who are persistent in dancing with each other week after week.
Sure.
And there are many times when people are not persistent. And maybe it's because they don't do the imitation part very well with each other, where they can lock into each other through imitation. And who's imitating who becomes part of the question. It's the dominant one who's then causes the less dominant one to imitate, as I understand it.
Yeah, and also it has to do with the talents involved. I mean, can you do it backwards in high heels, to quote a very famous dancer? And if you can, and you've found the person you can do that with, then you're going to be a great pair. Uh, so,
So
so that,
I'm still trying to figure out on the dance floor about dominance. Like the one who's the better dancer will be a dominant one, for
yes.
example, and then the lesser dominant one has to try to imitate. And if the lesser one can't imitate, then there's not going to be any persistence.
Right. Yeah.
And this is
You got a very nice combination of Kammerer's concepts right happening there at a very human level, which I think is very
I'm just a human guy trying to understand this
nicely
stuff,
done.
and that's okay. So we're right there with it. So
Right.
these basic ideas of attraction and its various forms, and imitation in its various ways. It's simpler to understand that, and persistence, easy to grasp that one. How do those ideas apply to meaningful coincidences?
Well, I suppose it depends on the meaningful coincidence and what you're bringing to it. If you,
Well,
I'm trying to
if
think of,
just take if you want to take Jung's example with the scarab,
yeah,
which most people know, and
right,
to summarize it anyway, Jung was dealing with a patient who wouldn't listen to
right,
him.
yeah,
Basically,
hmm,
she was too rational. He wanted to get her to be
hmm,
more intuitive, and
right,
she brought in a dream about a piece of jewelry with a scarab, a golden
hmm,
piece of jewelry with a scarab beetle
hmm,
on it. And Jung went to the window and got a beetle that was knocking on the window, and it looked like the beetle that the woman was
right,
talking about, the Egyptian scarab. And he said,
right.
"Here's your beetle." So let's do that story in camera
All right,
terms.
all right. Two things of that is opportunity, and as you point out, if you don't provide yourself with a lot of opportunities, you're not going to have a lot of synchronicities because it takes more information. If you have no information, you're not going to have matching information. And in this case, to go back literally to the skeptical level, if that bug hadn't been on that window right then, we never would have heard this story. We would have heard some other one where there was a bug on the window. But bugs were in the air at that moment, and the conversation was going that way, and there it is, just bring it right in, and it seems so magical. I mean, that's almost to the point of sleight of hand, that this becomes a magical moment and beginnings of a philosophy, when in fact it is a manifestation of, when you say it was in the air, yeah, the bug was in the air, and he picked it out and blew her mind, probably more than it blew his mind, except that he didn't realize what a clever opportunist he was being at that time as well. And there are many times when it doesn't happen. See, we hear the tales, and this is something that we have
Yeah,
to remember. And
we hear the tales. We hear the tales,
we
and
hear the tales where it worked.
we're
Where
selective, and let's not do that one because we know that one. But let's do attraction, imitation, and persistence here.
right. Well, with in the case of a of attraction, what you already had going on there, for instance, was a dance. They were already dancing, and he was trying to get her in tune with it. And when you're dancing, if you make a little move this way and it doesn't work that way, and finally if you put your hand up there and then swing, then it works perfectly. And what you've done, you're trying a few things here and a few things there until you get into sync. Well, he was trying a few things here, a few things there, and as we're swinging around, not quite making it, someone mentions golden scarab, and out the corner of the eye says, "Well, what do you know? I'll bring that one in," and it locked it up like that. If
So
it was the wrong, if it
was that imitation then?
that wasn't that, yeah, that was imitation. That was something that was similar in the atmosphere, pulling in, in other words, bugs were in the air mentally and physically, and they got put together.
The attractiveness was what, in this, before we got to the imitation. The attractiveness, Jung was trying to get her to be in sync with him, and
Right.
he was like the earth, and she was like the moon.
Right, and
he
he
was
was trying this, tugging her this way, wouldn't do it. Tugging her that way, wouldn't do it.
Wouldn't do it.
And finally, and there was a little theme going on about the scarab thing. And if there had been a bug, chances are he would have found something else, or he would have given up, and decided the stance was not going to work. But lo and behold, in the general information set, because bugs is bugs, and they have their own information set, whether they're mental or physical. There it was. Wisely, he pulled it in, and he closed the deal.
Okay, well, you're
And,
still
and
saying
then,
with
and
the,
after that, he has persistence.
then persistence, yeah, because then
Yeah.
without saying it, then they had persistence. They continued to go.
Right.
So
You know,
just,
and they can throw away other things. That's been such a big one, that they can throw away some of the things that they disagreed with, as dancers will do, and say, well, I'll go along with your move, even though that might not have been mine, because you've proved that you're the dancer, that you know, you're going in the direction I think I'd like to go.
Okay, it's a little bit abstract here for us, but these are useful principles, trying to be able to apply something descriptive to meaningful coincidences. And as you clearly have talked about, that the concept of meaningful is subjective to some degree. That the two bugs looked similar, the one in her dream and the one from the window. That's an objective, potentially objective description that Kammerer could describe, very similar to some of the things he described, that they're similar, like your peeing dream and your father dreaming, that was in one mind and then can't come from the outside to match. So that the similarity there would be pretty clear to an outside observer, I think.
Yeah, and when you're doing counseling of any sort, and astrologers, if they're good ones, it's too much of a long tail to get into why astrology physically might work, but what astrologers often serve as is as counselors,
Yes.
using planetary symbols to lock onto what they're feeling somebody's going for, and elaborate on that symbol to give the client a better feeling of where you might take this kind of energy or that kind of energy.
I think you're saying there's an intuitive read that the astrologer has to do of the other person.
Exactly. There's an absolute intuitive read, and a good astrologer, and this is one of the things that allows people to dismiss astrology, is because an astrologer isn't even a very good one and can't even read a chart very well, can still do a great reading if they're really intuitive. And in fact, someone who isn't an astrologer at all, they can put their hand on a piece of paper that's got a horoscope on it and do a great reading. And a gypsy can do a great reading, even though they got nothing going, because they know how to read the person. And they know what to pull in that's going to make the person a little bit more understanding of where they want them to go. And that comes to the point, you know, skeptics will say that's manipulation or sleight of hand. Other people will say it's simply getting together to make a better understanding, and utilizing whatever tools you have at the moment.
Astrology is a form of coincidence, in my way of thinking, and I think probably yours. A correlation between upstairs and downstairs, or as above, so below, but so also so below as above. And I wonder what that you could elaborate on the term, the crossroads of coincidence.
It's a great phrase. I've got a .com on it, because that was my hopeful title for a story about film story about Kammerer. And basically, when one coincidence comes upon another, when they're actually crossing, say you have one big coincidence, and that leads you to another big coincidence. And this is actually, and I'm sure you noted, I know you noted it in your writing, is that coincidences will tend to cluster in the same way that even random number rolls will cluster. But they seem to do it a little bit more so than a simple random roll. And that's why, as Kammerer suggests, that one of the areas of better understanding of seriality would be in gambling, because you know how long the roll is going to last. A good gambler knows when he's on a roll, and he knows when the roll is going to end, and he cuts his losses before it starts to turn bad. And a good one, it never turns bad, and they say, God, this guy's a winner. You know, he never loses, and it's because he can feel. You know, he's got, you know, he had the number down 3-4 times in a roll, and you know the fifth time is not going to happen, and he bows out. On the other hand, he won't go in if he sees that there's no pattern happening. He's looking around for a pattern.
What do you think creates a coincidence roll like that?
I think that if everything is made up of sets of communication, you have a resonance from however small the smaller particles are to the larger stepwise steps upward, and you get a resonance, at least for in our ability to see, which we evolutionarily get only enough to get us through and not more. We are able to sense them, and we can say, oh, well, this looks like we're on to something. Let's follow it. And then you get an immediate feeling when it's not going to happen. And it's because information makes up the reality itself. In other words, if you're just saying, oh, well, in one language it would be one name, in another language it'd be another. So how could they turn up? They're not related. They're related by their meaning in their inner core, because they're the same phenomenon, and a different word will, in different language, will describe it. But people, although they are filtered by their language, what they're trying to get at is the meaning inside the language, and that's where the information is rolling around. And the more intuitive you are, the more you can get past the language, and more you can talk to the person itself. I remember being isolated in Poland one time when I was performing over there, and I didn't speak much Polish, and they got tired of translating for me, and I wound up in a room with a 1-year-old, actually it was just about a 1.5, 2-year-old, just before language kid, only 2 in the room. And I got more communication out of him than I got in that whole room full of people talking Polish, because when we talked at a level that wasn't verbal yet quite. And so, you know, we could have a nice sort of a proto conversation in a way that I would have been lost in the room next door where everybody's speaking elaborate Polish, but
What does that have to do
English.
with what does that have to do with clustering, John?
It shows that the inner information that you're trying to get across is substantial itself, and what gets wrapped around it, which is language and individual experience, it's still connected to that central thing that you're trying to get across. And therefore, any language that or events that are central to that are going to tend to revolve around it. So you see the same word come up more and more times if you're trying to get the same thing across, even though you don't realize you're trying to get the same thing across, because the proto information that's in
it's
there,
still in the middle of it, and
it's still in the middle of it.
And that's what clustering seems to be, is the clusters of synchronicities or serialities are pointing towards a proto something or other in the middle of it. That's what you're trying to say.
And that's the attraction. Hypothesis.
And that's the attraction. And yeah. How does this crossroads of coincidence relate to being in the flow, because one of the things that people notice is that when they're in the flow, they tend to see more meaningful coincidences.
Because when it's like they're not, I guess it's because you start ignoring the outer stuff and you start looking for the inner groove, if you want to say it musically, and you let that pull you along, and therefore it's going to pull any pieces that are related to it together, and they'll just be there because you're already there.
It's so important what you say here, and we're coming to the end of our conversation. There is a tendency to people to think cause and effect, but there's a reciprocal relationship between experiencing a synchronicity, a meaningful coincidence, and then noticing that you do it, and then somehow you notice that starts getting you closer to the groove, and then the more you notice there's a coincidence, the more you
let yourself go.
You let yourself go into the groove, and
that's right.
That's where the old word groovy probably came from.
Right. Yeah. And you'll find that there are people as well. Again, I think you discover this, that you'll run into people where it happens that the moment you run into them, you start seeing synchronicities all over the place, and it's because basically they're a little more in tune than you are, probably.
Well, I thanks for that, John, because sometimes that happens for people when they get around me. They start seeing more coincidences, and I call that, I'm sprinkling the fairy dust of meaningful coincidences around. But this gives me a little better way of thinking about it, because I'm in the synchronicity groove more and more, actually, as I do this. So that's going to increase the likelihood that other people coming into my sphere are going to get closer to their own groove that's like the one I'm in.
Right, which also go back to the moon, and it also makes you, as things join that overall system that you've made yourself a kernel of, that has more gravitation to it, pulls more things into it, synchronizes and entrains more other things to come into it, and it becomes an increasingly more persistent body itself.
And that seems to be what's happening, and I've wondered about it, because when the Coincidence Project became officially a nonprofit, $1,000 showed up in my mailbox.
Yeah.
From where? And then the person, I contacted that person, gave us 25,000, which was a great start for us just beginning. Then a person who is editing something on our editing stories people send to our Coincidence Project website, people are invited to send their stories there, that we needed an editor to fine-tune those. The editor quit. 2 days later, somebody else emails me who's even a better editor, has more to contribute.
Sure.
And then I need medical synchronicity stories, because I want to give a talk about that. And then somebody emails me medical synchronicity stories. So it means, from what you're saying, that the groove that I am in is getting wider, stronger. The attraction is getting stronger. So
it's actually accruing mass, if you were to say it in a physical fashion.
A what?
Accruing mass.
So I'm becoming a gravitational center in a way.
In other words, a bunch of asteroids get together and they're getting a little small planet. More asteroids join, it's a larger planet, and pretty soon that planet's so big it gets a moon, and so on and so forth. That's the normal process of things. And what Kammerer tried to do, and this is where he made this, he was taking it. He started with just looking around, like you're walking downtown, you're seeing all the things. You're doing what Kammerer was doing, sort of at the end of or at the side road, where at least he said he started, but he didn't. He started much earlier than that, doing this very kind of stuff in music. because he began as a musician and became a biologist, and a very fine musician, and wrote some great songs, by the way. But he, without having the spin-off that soon became relativity and quantum theory, which got people really off base in many ways, he was still dealing with electromagnetism, which was new, thermodynamics, which was new, and he was saying there's a kernel in all of these that are the same thing, and they are the kernel of everyday life as well, when you're looking at everyday life at that scale. And when you take it down to a smaller scale, you're going to see something similar. It won't look that similar until you look more closely and say, oh, it's actually just another set of rhythms, the same thing. But you don't see it because you don't have the equipment to see it necessarily. And he made it as a generalization, sweeping one, saying this is how reality works. And that's what Wheeler is kind of going back to that, except he's trying to reduce it to bits because he likes computers. But in fact,
before we get into Wheeler, we're not talking about Wheeler today.
No,
we're talking about Kammerer, not talking about bits. We're talking about analog.
It's resonance.
Well, you started to make a lot of sense to me right then as you were.
It's resonance.
And resonance is fundamental to it. And you said something about about me and Kammerer, that I'm going down a side street from what he was
Well,
doing.
he starts off with, I'm sitting down here and I see a man with a Tyrolean hat, and I see a man with an umbrella and a vest, and I see one with 1 and 2, but not the other, and so on and so forth. And he began to make a system, Linnaean kind of system, out of all these. And then he would see subsets where they branch off, and you'd see 2 of one and 3 of another, and then they would come back and unite. And he was trying to use the that way of organizing things to see if just
and
regular
it got pretty complicated to all those different the trying to categorize things. I'm trying to categorize things too, and I'm going to ask you one more time, John,
sure.
because, and hope you don't go running off into something like Linnaeus categorization. Let's see. You said I'm going, me right here. See, I'm Bernie right here. I'm like going down a side street, and I'm feeling like I'm becoming an attractor in a groove that is making things happen that are hard to explain in even synchronicity terms, where people are coming to me with things that the Coincidence Project needs. And
yes, you're already doing that. What I meant by the side street is what you mentioned earlier today. You say you were walking down the street and you were collecting little bits and pieces as you went into town. Kammerer began his theory.
That's what Kammerer was doing. Okay. Well, you started
there, and then he generalized it from there, and he spent many years doing this.
That's a very good point that I'm doing still now. I'm doing this for 49 days. Is writing down. It's just what Kammerer was doing, and that's right. That's
great.
That I understand, and it's a good exercise for anybody to do, because it tunes you in to your environment. You start looking for the similarities that exist out there. So it's a very good exercise to do. I appreciate your connecting Kammerer and me in that way, because I hadn't thought of that. And what I'm looking for, because I'm writing a paper with 3 instances of out of the blue things coming when I needed them as a representative of the Coincidence Project. And that's what I was asking about, that I'm getting into a groove so that I become an attractor. And the word attractor is used in a different way, a basic attractor or something. But there's something
that's just in chaos theory.
Chaos theory. There's something about the attractors that we're talking about here that's similar to the attractor in chaos theory.
Right.
There's like I'm becoming an attractor as I become more deeply involved with this coincidence thing, and as people read my book and come to my podcast, I become this thing that is vibrating like
Right.
the gravitational field, to use the Earth analogy, is getting stronger. So that's in training people around me in some, and people I don't know, to start creating meaningful coincidences with me.
Right.
So how would you explain that happening in the terms that you understand?
Well, I think that's the way things happen in all reality, physical reality, electronic reality. I think, and that's what Kammerer was trying to express, is that's, and he was making it a set of universal principles.
There's a set of universal principles where something becomes, in this case, a bigger and bigger attractor. And one of the ways that I see that is on the dance floor again. The other day, I was doing a dance with my eyes closed, different from what I'd usually been doing. And I looked up at when getting to the end of it, and there were certain people who are very good dancers who were near me, who usually are not near me. So I was thinking that I was doing something that was attracting them. And I think that's very consistent with what you're describing, is you get into a certain groove, as you do with a musician. I mean, the fun that you have as a musician with an audience, whether everybody's like yapping with each other or standing around, and you hit some rhythm and some tune and some tone, and that somehow begins to attract them, and then they imitate what you're doing by moving, and they imitate it in a kinesthetic way, and then they want to persist at it and don't want to leave because it's so much fun. And so the music becomes a wonderful analogy for what we're talking about, that I've always wanted to be a rock and roll star, John, and maybe this is the way I'm being a rock and roll star.
There you go. Let's hear it for that. I mean, and it goes, a lot of this goes back to things that we had rejected, not to get obscure again, but I will, and that's Plato, and Neoplatonism. It leads you right to Wheeler, leads you right to a lot of this stuff, because we only think of things of cause, as cause and effect, as immediate cause, efficient cause, what we call it. And then, but the idea of final cause is dismissed. We don't believe in that anymore. Final cause, adult is the final cause of a seed. Adult plant is the final cause of a seed. And an attractor is the final cause of a set of dynamic activities that will almost always generally lead to that final thing. That's what an attractor is in chaos theory.
Oh, wonderful. So I'm an attractor, but the fun thing about the attractor is that, as in all life, it keeps evolving. It will keep changing. So there's a spiralness or a resonance thing. But so it's a temporary attraction, just like on a dance floor, that happens for some period of time, but then it evolves into some other sequence that also has an attractor. And this is a teleological argument that that there's another term for attractor, that we're drawn by what we think of as the future, but the attractor could actually be here right now, but we haven't seen it yet, or we don't recognize it right now. The final cause is right here.
And the final cause is actually, we're headed to it and we're part of it, but we don't know it most of the time, because we've now developed a philosophy that doesn't admit to that.
It doesn't admit to that. And that there is some element of my imagination contributing to the form of the final cause, that human ability to imagine the future influences that attractor that could be in the future, but it's right now. This becomes everything is now a now kind of thing that you're talking about, John.
Yeah, and also and this is part of also readings of the future, and people will see bits and pieces of the future and then they'll come true, is that there is physically final causes out there that are attractors, that are bringing you as part of that set of attractors to whatever that final thing may be. That this may have to do with and not getting completely out of the blue as everybody now, and that has to do with the time dimensionality. Does time have more than one dimension? Is time like space? In other words, it's all over the place. And we're going along what we're going along sort of a shaky line. And there's a few articles on my website you can go read. You can see a lot of it, including the dancing thing. If you look at the whole dancing metaphor, it's also why retrograde why planets go retrograde and back and forth in the sky. It's because we're dancing, we're passing by, and we're our level of gravitation swings and sways with it. We come around back again and swings and sways. They're a little further on, and we swing and we sway just like dancers do. The whole planetary system does that, and it does it at a frequency level that is way lower. You know, we look at that 60 beats per minute. That's a rhythm. 60 beats per second. That's a tone. This is 60 beats per century. That's the deep bass of the band.
Well, John, how can our audience see more of you besides watching this podcast?
Astrococktail.com.
Astrococktail.com.
Yeah, so, look in the article section or the music section or both.
He's going both ways, and what John is telling us is that we can hear the music of the spheres, which has a bunch of different meanings. But he's a musician who's an astrologer, so he's playing the guitar of the solar system, among other things. So, John, thank you very much for being with me. I mean, you got a lot of good information. I just need to organize you so I can understand it. And I think we've done a pretty good job about doing that today. And I thank you very much for being with me.
And very much enjoyed it.
This psychosphere is our mental atmosphere, like a hologram of cosmic consciousness.